Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Experience Etiquette. My name is Sarah Dietrich. I'm the Senior Content Marketing Manager here at AppQs, and I am joined by
Elena Heffley, and I am the Director of Customer Marketing here at AppQs.
How are you doing today, Elena?
I'm good. I am sitting in a hotel room in Arvada, Colorado. Sarah is the only person that I would drag a podcast mic across the country for, getting ready to go on vacation.
I'm forever grateful that you brought a mic to Colorado. It feels like a very Colorado thing to do to bring a mic somewhere. Before we get into it, if you haven't seen the Experience Etiquette, if you haven't read the Experience Etiquette yet, this is a series dedicated to helping people whose business it is to help customers engage with their platform, with their product in and off app.
There's a lot of directions you can go in, and the problem is common. We want to leverage when customers are most engaged to send them the right message at the right time.
We want to help you make experiences for your customers that can drive growth. I like it, your sage nodding at me.
I also have the sun
There's going to be some.
eyes, so I am like, I'm trying to life at this moment to give you good lighting. Did not bring my ring light. I said I have to have a limit, and it's bringing a light and a mic. I'll bring a mic. I will not bring a light, but I will sit in front of the sun and go blind just for you. No one else.
So much blinding. Thank you so much. Okay, so honestly, real talk, the Experience Etiquette was designed and built to help people who are in the messy business of building engagement and experiences that help their customers. And one of the big things that we've noticed is that there's a lot of hesitation around when to move, what to do, even beyond just what to build in a team, especially as customer engagement is getting so pushed towards marketing, towards CX, towards different teams that have really not a ton to do with product. We don't really know what the manners of the situation are, so this is an etiquette podcast, an etiquette interview series, where we dive into what the heck are we all doing here and how do we talk to each other.
It's a big problem. It's something that I think people think that people sometimes tend to think that they do it a little bit better than they actually do, because a lot of it is well intentioned, but it's really hard in practice when you're trying to move fast to actually collaborate effectively and pause to think about the best way to see what the marketing team has running, work with the product team effectively, check in with CX. It's a lot of spinning plates to keep up.
I got tired just listening to that.
I know. It's exhausting, right? I didn't bring my teacup either, but I have this lovely hotel mug. So
Before we get into today's question, I actually want to start by asking you a question, Elena, to kind of get us off on the right foot.
let's do it.
I want you to imagine a customer experience. If you had to describe what a customer experience during a chaotic launch is like in one metaphor, what is the metaphor?
Metaphor.
I want a metaphor. I want you to paint it for me. Paint me the chaos. Let live in it.
Ooh, I don't like. Okay, Sarah did not ask me this question ahead of time, so I was not prepared for this for our
No.
listeners. But what instinctively comes to mind for some reason is the Atlanta airport if there was an outage, because that airport is big and crazy and a lot. Like everyone's trying to get to somewhere. Everyone has their own thing that they're trying to do. They have their own destination they're trying to get to. They're on their own timeline. They don't have a lot of time. They're strapped. They're stressed. That's what it feels like sometimes.
I want to read you a letter that we got from a listener. I need some kind of scroll.
We should start requiring people to send them in via scroll. I think that's like everyone wants to move back towards analog. So like I think that's the perfect way to start.
I'm off screen. We have a scroll. Okay. Dear Experience Etiquette, we launched a major feature last quarter. Yippee!
Yay.
That is written in the in parenthetical. It was something customers had been asking for, just such a clear win. It wasn't.
Rough. Okay.
When we went back through the postmortem, the feature was fine. What had happened was that product sent an announcement, then marketing had folded it into an existing nurture sequence with different framing, and then CS mentioned it in an outreach using whatever language felt right to them at the time. Nobody coordinated or stopped to check in. A few customers came away not even realizing the feature existed, and at least one told their CSM they were evaluating other tools because we didn't have something we'd literally just shipped. What a bummer.
Because at least that's more pleasant than I would have put it, but continue.
Yeah. You can swear, by the way, in these letters when you send them. You're allowed to swear to us. We're cool.
Actually,
The frustrating part is that everyone did end up doing something. People were sending stuff. We all got to check the boxes. By every individual metric, the launch looked fine. I love just fine. The only signal that something had gone wrong showed up in customer conversations weeks later, and by then it was so hard to trace back. I'm not new to this. I can get people aligned in a room. What I can't get them to do is change how they measure success, because the moment the next launch kicks off, everyone's back to going for their own number. Coordinated strategy sounds great until it means someone has to slow down a campaign or share credit, God forbid share credit, for a touch that's going in someone else's report. How do you build a real cross-team communication strategy when the incentives are all pointing in different directions and the gaps only show up somewhere nobody's even looking at? Signed, Lost in Translation.
there's a lot. There's a lot there. There's a lot there. Like, I don't want to make lost in translation. I don't want to make you feel bad, but there's a lot of red flags in that message that aren't necessarily your fault, but there are a lot of things that make the why the problem exists very clear to me, at least. What do you think?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's very tangled. And let's hold Lost in Translation's hand really quick. Um, we're gonna hold your hand while we say this. There's a lot of red flags happening.
Yeah.
A lot of red flags. And they're not your fault,
No, and I
but
think
it's
actually a good thing. This reads very honest to me, and it seems to me like just like with a lot of things, and I think we said this to Leave Me Alone Legal last week, but this is another situation where it feels like it's not about what it's about, and you realize that. And you realize what the problems are, but naming them a little bit more directly may be where you're stuck, is kind of what I'm thinking. If that does that make sense? Like, yeah.
to start us off, I wanted to ask a question to you. Do you think, is this actually a communication problem or a measurement problem? Are we solving the wrong thing when we try to coordinate the messaging? What's going on?
I think I don't think it's or, I think it's and is like my
Okay.
overall response. But I think they're connected. They're two very connected problems. I don't think they're I don't think it's communication and measurement. I think it's a communication around measurement problem, because I think one of the things that I read kind of between the lines but also directly is that a major issue with this is that we don't have across all of these different teams a shared goal associated with a launch, but also maybe we don't have a shared OKR or goal that we're trying to achieve in general. And we haven't communicated that to each other. And I don't know if that exists at the leadership level. I don't know like where that kind of communication is broken down, but I actually think it's communication around measurement. And then I think communication separately and measurement separately are issues. But I think the chief issue is the fact that we don't all have the same goal associated with this launch or maybe with anything. And that's, I think, the real root of the problem.
So that's interesting. It sounds like this is somebody who's senior, but doesn't have the authority at a leadership level to dictate these North Star strategies, right? There's some kind of disconnect happening, and that's like also, why are the features shipping?
Right.
Like
True.
why is this happening to that level of context too? That's not something that I heard mentioned. I heard the feature is fine, but it's not about the feature being fine, right?
Right. It's
It's about, why are we building it?
well, and like what problem are we trying to solve? And like
Exactly.
what goal are we as a team trying to accomplish? So like I think there's like a what goal are we as a team trying to accomplish? What problems exist that prevent us from reaching that goal or that we
Yeah,
need
yeah, yeah.
to reach that goal? And like how are we as a unit addressing those problems? I think it's that like hierarchy, right? That feels off.
I guess it can feel off when you're looking at it from the back, because that's the thing, is it's always about whose metric is getting messed up, especially something like this. But then I guess my question piggybacking off of that is, if every team's metrics look fine, when in reality it's they're all disconnected. How do you make a case that something went wrong if there's no agreement?
Yeah, that's a really good point because like if everybody's leading metric looks fine, we got really high open rates on this. Customers responded about it. Like I think if all of those look fine, but then in a quarter or in 2 quarters we see a jump in churn or we don't see any improvement to our churn or our NRR number, we may be measuring the wrong things as leading indicators that were actually influencing our lagging metric. And I think that's it. I think that's the problem is the metrics that we're saying are fine are maybe not as impactful as we would like to think they are, which is like an ego check, I think, for some of us, because like we all want our numbers to look good. But I think it's also are we really looking at things that are actually driving value, or are we measuring things that look good, but they're not actually connected to that problem? And to your point on like the amorphous thing, like, are these things actually influencing things? Like, what actually influences the movement of that bigger metric that is harder to measure on a regular basis? But that's what you got to measure.
Yeah, we inherit a lot of understanding and ideas of what we should be measuring because traditionally they've been used and accepted as correct measurements of behavior. But that's no longer true. When it's taken out of context, you can't just pick and choose some of these metrics. They always have to be tied back to the larger goal.
A good example, I think, of that exact like hierarchical mismatch, maybe we'll call it, I don't know, is like for some of the work that we're doing around trying to drive adoption of a key feature, one of the things that we know is a proxy for them starting to actually use that feature is a customer setting up something within their account. So one of the things that I'm measuring as like a leading indicator that people are starting to use this feature is how many people have actually clicked the save button within their account settings that they need to do in order to be able to use that feature. So I think like that, to your point, like if we were actually measuring that honestly, maybe those numbers wouldn't always look very good, but it would be a more realistic metric to be looking at to kind of prove out the way that these teams are collaborating.
Yeah. And I'm a huge fan of what you're doing, by the way, with the AppKeys product. I know that you have the Substack that you update, the real Catch 22, which I love. I think it's such a really like nitty-gritty, detail-oriented look at the actual reality of going in and doing this work yourself. Companies are in a huge period of transition from the old way of doing things to the new. You specifically are so deep in that work. So I highly encourage anybody who's listening to this to go and check out Elena's Substack, The Real Catch 22. It's very vulnerable and personal about the skeletons in our closet here at AppKeys and what we're doing to get our company ready for a bigger, brighter day. So, with all that being said, then we have this problem. It's this very big problem of the metrics. We were assuming it sounds like based on the word fine, is doing a lot of work for us, right? Things are fine. And we know that feeling, I feel like, where you're like, okay, my number's fine, but I feel like there's a disconnect. We have a disconnect between the reality of what's being built and the people on the ground measuring towards that reality and trying to understand how reality can be broken down and measured.
Yeah, there's a whole another thing here too, right? There's the sharing credit and having
The internal politics. Yes, there is.
it's me versus my number versus your number versus this and who gets credit. My hot take is that any organization that has a who gets credit vibe, attitude, mindset, perspective is always going to be on the back foot of companies who have a much more like shared understanding of this is a team sport. And this is a perfect example as to why that's the case. So that's my hot take of the day. It shouldn't be revelatory, right? But like,
It's not new. It's such basics, but people don't know how to incentivize, or if they do, it's like, and again, it's another old way of incentivizing. That's very like Glengarry Glen Ross.
yeah,
Like,
it's like
it's competitive, not collaborative.
it's competitive in a way that's like ultimately, and this is the other thing to think about is like, who cares who gets credit? If the NRR number goes up, if the feature gets adopted like at a higher rate or at the rate that we expected, obviously some of those things are outside of our control, right? But like
Yeah.
if we're ultimately moving the things forward that we need to move forward, why does it matter? Everything that we do is so much more collaborative than people give it credit for and should be, but it's crazy.
I think there's also a very grounded reminder that we're in the age of AI where a job is not guaranteed. I think there's a real fear around visibility, right?
I think it's a leadership level thing around like, y'all are a team. You all are working together on a launch or whatever it is you're trying to achieve. And there needs to be at the leadership level, the head of product and the head of marketing can't be at odds all the time. They have to be able to work together because that rolls downhill. And I think that's what contributes to this, to your point.
So in that case, that's leadership though, right? Like on an individual basis, what do you say to the person who pushes back and says, well, our sons are performing. Why would I slow down?
Well, how are you measuring what happens after that? Like, yes, your sends are performing. Yes, you're getting a high open rate. How has that influenced your like higher level OKR or like your team's objective, and how are you connecting those things up? And I think that's something especially customer and lifecycle marketers need to be much more conscious of, because to your point about the age of AI and like everybody being worried about their job, I think it's imperative to be able to articulate how that connects to an outcome that matters at a leadership level.
There's also an emotional element to this too of why would I stop when I'm succeeding? Trying to convince somebody that their definition of success is not the right definition is a whole entire beast, right? Offering it as an opportunity as well of the sends are high. We can take it a step further. We could get a promotion. We could do this. Make it more about the possibility versus we have to fix the ship.
And I also think it keeps coming back to like there could also be a managing up element of it too, is like,
Mm.
yes, marketing leader or CX leader or whichever leader is like kind of your
Yes, leader.
leader. Yes, leader. Yes, my individual metrics are doing well. But I think the other thing too, that like to protect your job and demonstrate the value that you bring, is asking questions that are thoughtful and difficult. Like, I think it's worth saying like, we just had our quarterly all hands, or we just had like our head of finance just sent out like what our performance was last month, or like using some of those metrics that we all get shared in some way, shape, or form from our leadership team at whatever cadence that is. I think there's also a level of like, hey, I noticed that this number isn't doing really well, but we did all this stuff this quarter or this month that was meant to like drive adoption or drive engagement or whatever the goal was within your specific team. My emails or my campaigns performed really well, but there isn't like, I'm noticing that there's still not there. I don't see an impact at the top level metrics level. Like asking thoughtful questions and hard questions of your leader also demonstrates a level of curiosity that I think is also imperative when it comes to the um, like how AI is shaping companies and hiring and org structures and all of that. Because like there's a human level of curiosity that I think is necessary to flag. And like that just shows that you are thinking a little bit bigger than what you're doing. And it may challenge your leaders' thinking in a way that like helps drive some change. I think there's also something that you just said made me think of this too. I think another
I
maybe
love making you think.
it's the best. I love when anyone makes me think. A potential additional hot take is I can get aligned,
Another one.
but I can't get people to change. I would argue then you're not getting people aligned,
I
because
agree.
right? Because like if people are aligned, that has an implication to me at least, and I don't know, I'd be curious what your thought is on this, but like I think when you have people aligned, there's an implication that you have a shared agreement of the problem or the situation. I think if you've been trying to make progress towards this for a while, I would argue that the alignment isn't as strong as you think it is.
You might be getting yeses in the room and like head nods, or that God forbid you're getting silence taken as a yes.
I can't fix it if I don't know there's a problem with it. Like,
Right. I truly think that people either they're checked out, and that's one problem that could be happening here. You can try and convince people to care, but after a certain point, you can only bring them to the threshold they're going to cross when they cross.
as companies evolve, some people prefer to be at a different stage, right? Some people just are not going to be pulled along because they're too tied to how things used to work or how we always do this. They're too context attached in a way that I think you have to be kind of pragmatic about where people are on that. So like,
Yeah.
I think that's a piece too.
And I also think it's like worth getting good with the fact of questioning yourself of are you context attached, lost in translation? There's a sense that you're checked out a little bit too in the letter. There's a distance to this letter. I would also examine why you're doing this, the frustration. What your definition of aligned is right now might not be the reality of the situation. There's a little bit of a gap too in how the situation is versus this way that you're seeing it.
Like, I think you need to directly call that out and say, y'all, we always talk about this problem, or like we always say that we're going to do this differently next time. The discipline that is required to
Yeah.
actually pause, is this consistent with what we agreed to do differently after the postmortem? Because like a postmortem is only as good as what you do with it afterwards, right? Like, yes, it's very helpful to get all of this information about what worked, what didn't, what we
Oh
want to do
yeah.
differently, all of that. But like, unless you have at the leadership level, or even at just, it doesn't even have to be at the across the whole team, but like at the executive sponsor of your project level, that person has to empower you, in this case, lost in translation. You have to be empowered to not necessarily tell people no and shut things down, but strong willed enough to like call out when people are in flight to stop them. And that doesn't necessarily mean that like you need to slow people down all the time. I think you need to use your judgment based on like what you do agree on in these postmortems and in this conversation around like, are we actually aligned? I think that you need like, I think data can be your friend. Don't assume that people have all of the context and are making the data, the connections between your leading indicators and your lagging metrics the way that you might be, or the way you're seeing and maybe other people are. Looking at the last few feature launches as an example, like here's like a very practical thing that I would do. Looking at the last couple of feature launches or just cross-functional campaigns or initiatives in general that you've done, and work with your business intelligence team or your Salesforce team or somebody on the data side, unless you can pull that information yourself, to look at what was the goal we were trying to achieve, what are the indicators that we were getting closer to that, what were everybody's numbers if you have access to those, or even if you only have access to yours. I think that also demonstrates the level of vulnerability that brings people in a little bit more, and have a conversation with folks or record a loom and send it to people and then have a facilitated discussion around, we all said that we thought that this should have gone well, but it actually went just fine, or it fell flat. Here's where we see the cracks through this process. And I think that also helps people feel a little bit less you're doing something wrong, Sarah, and more, okay, now I have a sense of like from the numbers perspective, what isn't working. Like the data is always going to be able to help you tell that story and have that conversation a little bit more effectively. Data is complicated for people to understand. And like some people's brains just don't work in a way that like gets it as quickly. Mine is one of them. Also assume that people may not know, but they might be scared to ask a question to get clarity, or they might
Yes.
know what to ask. Like that's happened
Yes.
time. Like I don't even know what to ask, so I'm not going to say anything, and my stuff's fine. So we'll keep going.
We know what bad looks like. What does good actually look like here? What does a coordinated launch feel like from the inside when it is working?
So what I've seen work in the past has been when we've aligned around a shared goal as the start of our project. We've gotten beta feedback, we've had alpha testers, we've had all of these things done. We're ready to go to GA now. How are we going to measure GA? And when we've done that, we've been much more effective in staying collaborative towards what that ultimate goal is of that launch, as opposed to let's discuss what success looks like as a group, and then whoever's involved in the project has like come up with their set of tactics, or here's what my role is from like a campaigns perspective or a messaging perspective, and we've brought those to the conversation knowing what our shared goal is, and established in an honest conversation, how are we going to communicate, what's our meeting cadence, how are we going to align on lists, and like getting really into the details. Once we've aligned on that goal for this thing, it's made it a lot more effective and helped us stay out of our silos better.
Lost in translation. We hope that this has been helpful. Thank you so much for writing in. Elena, do you have any last words that you want to say to Lost in Translation?
This is a sucky situation, and it's frustrating to see the things that people around you aren't seeing. But the only way you're going to get out of the Atlanta airport is if everybody lets go of credit and stops focusing on their own area and their own lane and focuses on how we accomplish the goal that we need to accomplish together.
Thank you all so much for tuning in to another episode of The Experience Etiquette, where we sit down and we hash out the gritty realities of trying to change behavior, not only for customers to drive engagement and growth, but on the back end so that we can all do our jobs better and not have mental breakdowns. Because the hell is other people.
Ain't that the truth?
If you are interested in submitting your own question for Elena and I to talk through and to answer and figure out and work through with you, you can submit it to appcues.typeform.com/etiquette. That's appcues.typeform.com/etiquette. You can also read the written version of this on our blog at appcues.com/blog, or follow along on YouTube when all of these drop for any short clips. Follow Elena or myself on LinkedIn. We'll always be posting about behavior in our different lanes from a customer marketing perspective and lifecycle perspective, and from me from a content perspective. If you want to know what Elena's up to on the AppQ side, getting really specific, she has a newsletter, The Real Catch 22 on Substack. You can see her there, see what this looks like in practice, the actual reality of showing up to meetings with real people and not just the theory abstract of it. Thank you all so much again for tuning in, and we will see you again in 2 weeks for our next letter. Take care. Bye.